"I need someone to make me feel young again," Margaret said, moving closer on her couch. The wine glasses sat forgotten. City lights painted shadows across her silver hair. I'd been photographing her studio renovation for weeks. Professional. Distance had dissolved somewhere between the kill delivery and this moment. At 25, I thought I knew about desire. But watching this 52-year-old woman choose vulnerability changed everything. Her hand found mine. Stay. The age gap should have mattered. Her daughters, my parents, the neighbors, everyone would have opinions. But in that moment, I only saw Margaret. Brilliant, brave, starting over. My answer would change both our lives. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I'd been living in the converted loft for 3 months, settling into the rhythm of freelance life. My schedule had slowly shifted later and later until editing photos at midnight became my new normal. The industrial windows of my workspace faced the building's rooftop garden, usually just a dark maze of planters and trellises at this hour. That changed one night in early June. I was deep in post-processing a wedding album when movement caught my eye. A figure emerged onto the roof, silver hair catching the security lights. It was my neighbor from 4B, Margaret. I'd learned from the mailboxes. She wore a long cardigan against the night air, moving with unconscious grace between the raised beds with a metal watering can. I found myself pausing my work, watching as she tended to her midnight garden. There was something mesmerizing about her unhurried movements. It's the way she'd pause to touch a leaf or adjust a climbing vine. The breeze lifted her hair, and she'd absently tuck it back, lost in her own world. You know those rare moments when you glimpse something not meant for an audience? That's what it felt like, a private ritual I'd stumbled upon. I should have looked away, should have returned to my editing. Instead, I sat there, coffee going cold beside my keyboard. That's when she saw me. Our eyes met through the wall of windows, and I felt that familiar jolt of being caught staring. But instead of the awkward glance away I expected, Margaret smiled. She lifted her watering can in a playful toast, moonlight glinting off the metal. Without thinking, I raised my coffee mug in return. Her smile widened, and something passed between us in that silent exchange. A shared acknowledgement of our midnight habits, maybe? Or just the simple recognition between two people awake when the rest of the world slept. She returned to her watering, and I tried to focus on my work. But my thoughts kept drifting to that small interaction, replaying the gentle humor in her gesture. I'd seen Margaret in passing before, polite nods in the hallway, holding the elevator door. But this felt different, more real. Somehow, the next few nights, I caught myself glancing at the roof more often than I'd admit. The garden remained empty, though. I told myself I wasn't disappointed. These were just the idle thoughts that come with too many late nights and too much solitude. By the third morning, I'd almost convinced myself to forget about it. I was heading out for coffee when I noticed something outside my door. A small terracotta pot with a healthy basil plant. Its leaves, dark and fragrant. A handwritten note was tucked beside it. For your late-night coffee ritual. Fresh herbs make everything better. I picked up the pot, running my fingers over its rough surface. The basil released its scent, sharp and sweet in the morning air. I stood there longer than I should have, holding this unexpected gift, wondering about the woman who gardens at midnight and leaves herbs for neighbors. The morning sun warmed my shoulders through the hall window, and I found myself smiling. It was such a small thing, really. Just a plant, just a note. But sometimes the smallest gestures carry the most weight, don't they? I looked down at the carefully potted basil and felt the strange sensation that something was beginning. Though I couldn't have told you what. I almost missed it that morning. Another small pot. This time holding what looked like a cluster of mint green roses made of rubber. The succulent sat beside my door with a folded note in the same handwriting as before. For your windowsill needs neglect to thrive. Perfect for artists. I picked up the pot, studying Margaret's penmanship. The letters leaned forward eagerly, like they were rushing to share a secret. There was something intimate about seeing someone's handwriting. For the first time, the way they crossed their T's or dotted their I's. Margaret's words had a fluid grace to them, matching the way she moved through her garden. The succulent found its home on my windowsill, next to the thriving basil plant. I positioned it carefully, then stepped back to see how the morning light played across its leaves. Throughout the day, between editing sessions, I kept finding myself picking up the note again. The paper had grown soft at the creases from my repeated handling around mid-afternoon. When I should have been focusing on a client's engagement photos, I found myself falling down an internet rabbit hole about succulents instead. I learned they were desert plants evolved to survive in harsh conditions. They stored water in their leaves and actually preferred to be left alone. The secret to keeping them alive is to mostly forget about them, one article advised. I smiled at that. Thinking about Margaret's note. Perfect for artists indeed. She'd clearly noticed my erratic schedule, the way I could get lost in work for days at a time. The thought that she'd put that much consideration into choosing the right plant made something warm settle in my chest. That evening, I moved my laptop to the window seat, positioning myself where I could see both my new plant and the rooftop garden. The succulent's leaves caught the sunset, glowing like sea glass. I tried to focus on editing, but my eyes kept drifting to the empty garden above. The next night found me in the same spot, pretending I wasn't waiting for something or someone. The basil had already perfumed my morning coffee, making it impossible not to think about the woman who'd given it to me. I'd caught myself wondering about her life, what kept her up so late. Whether she had trouble sleeping or just preferred the quiet of midnight like I did. Another night passed the same way. I'd developed a new habit of glancing up every few minutes, telling myself I was just resting my eyes from the screen. The rooftop remained empty except for the plants swaying gently in the evening breeze. On the third night, just as I was about to call it quits, movement caught my eye. A familiar figure emerged onto the roof, silver hair gleaming under the security lights. Margaret wore the same cardigan as before, carrying her watering can with unhurried purpose. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was on my feet and heading to the kitchen. My hands trembled slightly as I grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the fridge. Was this too forward? Too presumptuous? But she'd started this with her gifts, hadn't she? The stairwell to the roof felt longer than usual, each step accompanied by the quiet clink of bottles and the increasingly loud thud of my heart. I kept my pace measured, trying to project a casualness I didn't feel. This was just being neighborly, I told myself. Just returning a kind gesture. Nothing more than that. But as I climbed those final steps, I couldn't quite convince myself. There was something about the midnight hour that made everything feel more significant, more charged with possibility. Like those quiet moments just before dawn when the world holds its breath, waiting to see what the new day might bring. The door to the roof opened silently. And there she was, Margaret, silhouetted against a canopy of tiny string lights that hadn't been there last week. They cast a warm glow over her tomato plants, transforming the utilitarian rooftop into something almost magical. She was kneeling beside a row of containers, checking the soil with practiced fingers. I cleared my throat softly. I thought you might like some company. Margaret turned, and in the gentle light, I could see she wasn't surprised at all. Her eyes fell to the bottles in my hands, and a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I was wondering when you'd make it up here. The easy acceptance in her voice steadied my nerves. I crossed the roof and offered her one of the bottles. She took it with a nod of thanks, then gestured to a pair of weathered Adirondack chairs tucked between the planters. The lights are new, I said, settling into one of the chairs. Just put them up yesterday. The plants don't care, of course, but they make it feel more like a proper garden. She took a sip of her beer, looking out at the city skyline. Sometimes, I need the reminder that beauty is as important as function. The city spread out before us, a tapestry of twinkling lights competing with the stars. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I found myself relaxing into it, the tension in my shoulders easing. "How are the succulents adapting?" she asked, turning those observant eyes my way. "Thriving on neglect, just as promised. Though I'm better with the basil, it's completely transformed my morning coffee." Her laugh was soft and genuine. A photographer who appreciates subtle flavors. That makes sense. That makes sense. You knew I was a photographer. The light in your window is always on late, and I've seen you hunched over your computer. The way you squint at the screen, it reminded me of how I used to look at contracts. She traced the rim of her bottle. With one finger, "Speaking of changes, I'm converting my home office into an art studio." That caught my attention. "What kind of art?" "Ceramics, mainly. I left corporate consulting last month. 25 years of boardrooms and PowerPoint presentations. I decided it was time for something that actually made me feel alive." There was a quiet defiance in her voice, like she was still convincing herself. "That's brave." "Or foolish," she said, but she was smiling. "Actually, I've been thinking I'd like to document the transformation. The whole metamorphosis from sterile office to creative space. Would you happen to know any photographers who might be interested in that kind of project?" My heart picked up speed, but I tried to keep my voice professional. "I might know someone." "What exactly did you have in mind?" Margaret turned in her chair to face me fully, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin warm. "Progress shots, mainly. Capturing the stages as the space evolves. The before and after, but also the messy middle. That's the part people usually hide away." "I'd be interested," I said, then added quickly, "in taking on the project, I mean." She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Saturday morning, say around 10. We can discuss the details then." Saturday works perfectly. The conversation flowed easily after that, meandering through topics like water finding its natural course. She told me about the kill she'd ordered, how she'd need help when it was delivered. I found myself offering assistance before she could ask, and her grateful smile made my chest tight. We talked until our bottles were empty and the night had deepened around us. The string lights created a small universe of warmth, and neither of us seemed eager to break its spell. But when the church bells in the distance struck 2 in the morning, Margaret stood with reluctance. "I should get some sleep," she said. Gathering her gardening tools, I helped her tidy up, hyper-aware of our hands, occasionally brushing as we worked. At the roof access door, she paused and touched my arm lightly. The contact was brief but deliberate. "Thank you for the company," she said softly. "I'd forgotten how nice it is to talk with someone who really listens." Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer before she pulled away, leaving that spot on my arm tingling as we descended the stairs in shared silence. I arrived at Margaret's door at precisely 10 o'clock, camera bag slung over my shoulder and tripod in hand. She answered on the first knock, and I had to catch my breath. Gone was the corporate polish I'd seen in her LinkedIn photos during my late-night research. Instead, she wore faded jeans with paint spatters and an oversized chambray shirt with rolled sleeves. Her silver hair was pulled back in a casual knot, and her feet were bare against the hardwood floors. "Right on time," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been up since dawn clearing the space." I followed her down the hallway, noticing how differently she moved in these clothes, lighter, close bouncing on the balls of her feet. The home office she led me to had been stripped completely bare. Afternoon sunlight poured through tall windows, highlighting the empty expanse of honey-colored hardwood. "I wanted you to see it completely naked," Margaret said, gesturing to the bare walls. "Before we start bringing in all the clay and wheels and shelving." She pulled a rolled paper from behind the door. "I've been sketching layouts all week." I set up my equipment while she spread the drawings across the floor. Kneeling beside them, she began explaining her vision with quiet intensity, pointing out where each station would go. Her enthusiasm was contagious. I found myself moving around her with my camera, capturing the way she leaned over the plans, how her hands traced the pencil lines as she spoke. "The kill will go here," she said, tapping a corner of the sketch. "It's being delivered next week, actually. I should probably hire some help for that." "I could help," I offered, lowering my camera. The words were out before I could second guess. Then Margaret looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. A silence stretched just long enough to make me wonder if I'd overstepped. But then she smiled. "That would be wonderful, actually. Thank you." We fell into an easy rhythm after that. I photographed while she worked, documenting her measuring walls and marking placement points on the floor with blue painter's tape. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the room as hours slipped by unnoticed. Around 7 o'clock, Margaret straightened up from where she'd been marking the floor and stretched. "I'm starving. How do you feel about Thai food?" I was reviewing shots on my laptop screen, cross-legged on the floor. "Thai sounds perfect." She ordered for us both, pad Thai for her, green curry for me, and then crossed the room to where I sat. "Show me what you've captured." Margaret leaned over my shoulder as I scrolled through the day's photos. Her hand settled briefly on my back for balance, just between my shoulder blades. It was a casual touch, lasting maybe 2 seconds. But my skin registered every millisecond of contact through my thin t-shirt. I kept scrolling, trying to focus on explaining my compositional choices while hyper-aware of her presence behind me. When the food arrived, we sat on the floor using moving boxes as makeshift tables. Margaret told me stories about her corporate life between bites of noodles, the politics, the pressure, the slow realization that she'd built a life that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow inside. "I haven't felt this energized about a project in years," she said later, walking me to her door. There was a hesitation in her voice, like she wanted to say more. The pause held meaning neither of us was ready to name. I shifted my equipment bag on my shoulder. "Same time next Saturday." "Yes," she said softly. "Though you might want to wear old clothes. We'll be getting dusty." I arrived at 7:30 in the morning wearing my oldest jeans and a faded college t-shirt. Margaret answered immediately, already dressed in work clothes and practically vibrating with energy. The delivery team had called. They were 20 minutes out. "I made coffee," she said, leading me into her kitchen, "and I picked up bagels. We should eat something before the heavy lifting starts." The morning light filled her kitchen, catching the silver in her hair as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. We sat at her small breakfast table, sharing cream cheese and talking through the logistics of getting a 600-pound kill up 3 flights and through her condo's layout. "My ex-husband would have hired people for all of this," she said, spreading cream cheese with precise strokes. "But there's something satisfying about doing it ourselves, don't you think?" The delivery team arrived right on schedule, 2 guys in company polos who helped us navigate the kill up the service elevator and into Margaret's studio. Once there, though, they just dropped it and left, leaving us to handle the final positioning and installation. I was surprised by how capable Margaret was with tools and measurements. She worked methodically, consulting the manual, double-checking clearances. When we needed to shift the kill a few inches left, she got right in there with me, lifting her share of the weight. "My father was a contractor," she explained, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "He taught all his daughters how to use tools properly. Said he wasn't raising helpless women." We worked steadily through the morning, taking breaks, only for water and coffee. During one of these pauses, Margaret mentioned her daughters. "Elena's in Seattle working for Amazon," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside me. "And Sarah's doing her residency in Boston." They think I've lost my mind, trading consulting for ceramics. She smiled, but I caught a hint of something wistful in her expression. They're both so practical, like their father. My family's the same way, I admitted. Back in Michigan, they keep asking when I'm going to get a real job instead of just taking pictures. Do you miss them? Sometimes, but they don't really get this life. I gestured to the studio, the city beyond the windows. They think I'm just ... drifting. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes drifting is how you find your true course. By mid-afternoon, we had the kill properly positioned, vented, and wired. Margaret insisted on running the first test, firing herself, carefully following each step in the manual. When she closed the lid and turned it on, we both held our breath until the digital display lit up. "We did it," she said softly. Then louder, "We actually did it." She turned to me with such pure joy that my chest tightened. "We should celebrate," I said. "Pizza? Perfect. And I have wine." She checked her watch. "The first firing takes 4 hours. We could review last week's photos while we wait." We both knew we were creating excuses to extend our time together, but neither of us mentioned it. Margaret ordered the pizza while I set up my laptop. When she returned, she was carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of red wine. "We've earned this," she said, pouring generous measures for both of us. The studio felt different as evening approached. The kill cast a warm glow from its digital display, and the city lights were starting to twinkle beyond the windows. Margaret Tay sat close beside me on the floor, our shoulders nearly touching as we scrolled through photos. The wine loosened something between us, making it easier to laugh, to lean in when pointing at the screen. When the pizza arrived, we ate it straight from the box, talking about everything and nothing, her daughter's childhood art projects. My first camera, the way cities feel different at night. The kill hummed quietly in the background, like a third presence, keeping watch over our gradually deepening connection. The room grew steadily warmer as the kill worked through its first firing. Margaret rolled up her sleeves, revealing toned forearms dusted with clay from our earlier work. I caught myself watching the way she gestured when she talked, how her hands moved through the air like she was already shaping something new. The kill's steady hum filled the comfortable silence as Margaret poured us each a second glass of wine. We'd abandoned the laptop on her desk, migrating to the small couch she'd brought in for the studio. The city sparkled beyond her windows, a constellation of lives being lived while we sat in this bubble of warmth and trust. "I was married for 30 years, Margaret said suddenly, swirling the wine in her glass. "Married at 22, right out of college. Everyone said we were perfect together. The ambitious lawyer and the rising marketing executive." She gave a soft laugh that held no humor. We looked great on paper. I turned toward her, drawing one leg up onto the couch. The wine had softened the edges of everything, making this confession feel natural, expected even. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "Life happened. Or rather, everyone else's version of my life happened." She took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "I was so busy being who everyone expected. The perfect wife, the devoted mother, the corporate success story, that I forgot to ask myself what I wanted. One morning I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back." The city lights painted shifting patterns across her face as she spoke. Her silver hair caught the glow from the kiln, creating a halo effect that made her look somehow both vulnerable and powerful. "The divorce was final 8 months ago," she continued. "My daughters were shocked. My friends kept asking what went wrong." She smiled ruefully. "How do you explain that nothing went wrong, exactly? That you just realized you've been sleeping through your own life?" And now, I found myself leaning closer, drawn by her honesty. Now I'm 52, starting over, And it's the most terrifying and exhilarating thing I've ever done. She turned to face me fully. What about you? What brings a talented young photographer to be spending his Saturday night with a woman twice his age? The wine made me brave enough to answer truthfully. I'm 25 and everything looks successful on the surface. Good clients, decent portfolio, making rent in the city. I ran a hand through my hair, searching for words. But sometimes it feels like I'm just ... drifting. Like I'm waiting for real life to begin, you know? Margaret nodded, her eyes intent on my face. Tell me more about that feeling. It's like everyone else seems to have this certainty about their path. My sister's married with 2 kids, my best friend's making partner at his firm. I paused, surprised by how easily the words came. Meanwhile, I'm taking beautiful photos of other people's lives, but sometimes I feel like I'm watching my own life through a lens instead of living it. Are you happy with your work? She asked, and I could tell she genuinely wanted to know. Work itself, yes. God, yes. When I'm setting up a shot, when everything aligns just right, those moments feel real, present. I met her eyes, like today, working with you. I've never met anyone who makes me want to be more present in my own life. The admission hung in the air between us. Margaret went very still, then set her wineglass down carefully on the floor. When she looked back at me, something had shifted in her expression. I need someone to make me feel young again, she said softly, moving closer on the couch. The words were barely above a whisper, but they filled the entire room. I understood immediately that she didn't mean younger. She meant alive, awake, present in her own skin. The space between us crackled with possibility. The kill hummed its steady rhythm, the only sound besides our breathing. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, I reached out. My hand hovered near her face, not quite touching. Are you sure? I asked, my voice rough. About this, about ... us. Her eyes held mine, clear and certain despite the wine, despite the late hour, despite all the reasons this moment shouldn't be happening. Her response was to turn her cheek into my palm, her skin warm against my hand. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. I've been sure since that night with the beers on the roof, Margaret whispered. She caught my other hand in hers, her fingers intertwining with mine. But we should be clear about what this is. And isn't. The kill's steady background hum seemed to intensify the intimacy of the moment. I nodded, knowing she was right. The age difference, I said softly. 27 years. She squeezed my hand. My daughters are closer to your age than I am. Katie's 28, Sarah's 30. Her eyes searched mine. Does that bother you? No, I answered honestly. But I understand if it bothers you. Margaret shifted closer, her knee brushing against mine. What bothers me is wondering if this is just ... an experience for you. Something casual with an older woman. Her voice held no judgment, just vulnerability. This isn't casual for me. I traced my thumb along her cheekbone, marveling at how natural it felt to touch her like this. I've never felt more myself than I do with you. Every conversation, every moment, it matters. She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into my touch. When she opened them again, there was a shimmer of moisture there. I'm terrified of being a cliché, she admitted. The divorced woman having a midlife crisis with a younger man. I'm scared you'll wake up one morning and regret this. Margaret. I said her name like a prayer, trying to pour everything I felt into that single word. She met my gaze steadily, despite her confession. I've spent too many years worried about what other people think. But this ... she gestured between us. Whatever. This becomes, I want it to be honest. Words felt increasingly inadequate. I leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Instead, she met me halfway. The first touch of our lips was careful, tentative, testing boundaries neither of us had expected to cross. But then Margaret made a small sound in the back of her throat, and something shifted. The kiss deepened, with an intensity that surprised us both. Her hands found their way into my hair as mine slipped to her waist, drawing her closer. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing unsteadily. The studio suddenly felt too warm, too small, to contain whatever was building between us. Margaret stood, creating some space, and ran a slightly shaky hand through her silver hair. In the kill's glow, she looked luminous. "Would you like to stay?" she asked softly, her voice remarkably composed despite the flush in her cheeks. "I'd understand if you need time to think about what we're starting here." I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, carefully hidden behind years of practiced poise. Before I could answer, sharp beeping cut through the charged atmosphere, the kill timer going off. Margaret gave a small, breathless laugh. "I should check that," she said, moving toward the kill. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, giving me space to decide. I watched her cross the room, noting how her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the kill controls. The choice she'd offered hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility. I watched Margaret at the kill, her movements precise as she checked temperatures and adjusted settings. The soft orange glow caught the silver in her hair, creating a halo effect that made my breath catch. She was giving me time to think, but I didn't need it. What I needed was for her to understand that this wasn't some fleeting curiosity or misplaced attraction to her confidence. The past weeks had changed. Something fundamental in how I saw my life, my choices. Each midnight garden encounter, every shared moment in this studio, they weren't random events, but steps leading us here. I'd spent too many years drifting, waiting for life to happen. Margaret showed me what it meant to choose deliberately, to reshape your world with intention. When she turned back from the kill, I spoke before she could ask if I'd decided. "You know, I've been watching you these past weeks," I admitted. Not in a creepy way, but in moments like when you're in your garden at midnight, or when you're planning this studio. You move through the world with such purpose now. It makes me want to be more deliberate with my own choices. Margaret sat back down on the couch, maintaining a careful distance. Her eyes held soft surprise at my words. "I'm drawn to your wisdom," I continued, "but more than that, I admire your courage. Starting over isn't easy at any age. You're not just changing careers, you're reclaiming yourself. How could I not be attracted to that kind of bravery?" "I've been terrified," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified you'd see me as some cliché, the older woman desperately grasping at youth through a younger man." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I suppose we've both been carrying our own insecurities." Her honesty made me smile, and suddenly the tension in the room shifted into something warmer, more comfortable. "Remember that succulent you left at my door?" I asked. She nodded, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "It was the perfect gift, you know? Something that thrives with patience rather than constant attention." I met her eyes. "Maybe that's what. We both need space to grow at our own pace, but together." Understanding bloomed across her face as she caught the metaphor. The smile that had been threatening broke free, transforming her entire expression. She stood slowly, deliberately, and extended her hand toward me. The gesture was clear, an invitation, a choice, a beginning. I didn't hesitate. Taking her hand, I stood with her, closing the careful distance she'd maintained. Her fingers were warm against mine, steady now where they'd trembled before. In the kill's gentle glow, everything felt possible. Margaret's hand remained steady. In mine, as she led me through her apartment, the space felt different now, more intimate, as if every object held new meaning. We passed the half-finished studio where our wine glasses still sat on the sawhorses, catching the last amber glow from the cooling kiln. The scent of fired clay lingered in the air, earthy and warm. Her living room opened before us, a carefully curated collection of her life's chapters. I slowed, taking in details I hadn't noticed during our previous conversations. A wall of built-in bookshelves housed volumes on art, philosophy, and business, the intersection of her past and present selves. Handmade pottery pieces dotted the shelves, each one telling its own story of creation and learning. My eyes caught on a series of photographs, her daughters, I assumed. Two young women, with Margaret's determined chin and bright eyes, smiled. From various locations, graduation ceremonies, hiking trails, city streets. She noticed my attention and squeezed my hand gently. "That's Rachel in Seattle. She's finishing her PhD," she said softly. "And Emma in Boston. She's a pediatrician now." Pride colored her voice, but also a hint of something else perhaps. Concern about what they'd think of this moment, of us. I ran my thumb across her knuckles, a silent reassurance. She tugged me forward again, past a collection of framed sketches that looked like her early pottery designs. Each step felt weighted with intention, like we were moving through more than just physical space. The hallway narrowed, and the sounds of the city grew more distinct as we approached what I knew must be her bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, and through it I could see the dance of city lights through sheer curtains, creating soft, shifting patterns on the walls. The room beyond seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation. Margaret paused at the threshold, turning to face me. Her silver hair caught the filtered light, creating that familiar halo effect that had first caught my attention all those nights ago. Her eyes searched mine, clear and direct, despite the intimacy of the moment. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question carried the weight of everything we'd discussed, our age difference, the complications, the potential judgments we might face. I answered by drawing her close, one hand sliding to the small of her back, while the other cradled her cheek. "I've been sure since I found that succulent at my door," I whispered against her hair. "Maybe even before that, during our midnight toast through the windows." She laughed softly against my shoulder, a sound of relief and joy that vibrated through both of us. Felt the last of her hesitation dissolve as she relaxed into my embrace. The tension that had carried us through our earlier conversations transformed into something warmer, more certain. We moved into her room slowly, deliberately. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, distant sirens, the occasional EUs, the occasional EUs, the occasional EUs, the occasional honk of taxis, the steady hum of air conditioners in neighboring buildings. But inside this space, time seemed to shift into a different gear. Each moment stretched out, full of meaning and possibility. The room itself felt like a confession of trust, her private world with its carefully chosen art. The stack of books. On her bedside table, a hand-woven throw draped across a reading chair. She was letting me see all of it, sharing these intimate details of her daily life. Margaret's hand found mine again in the semi-darkness. We stood there, letting the significance of this choice settle around us like dust motes in the filtered light. Everything that had led us here, from that first silent midnight exchange to our shared meals and conversations, had been building toward this moment of mutual understanding and acceptance. The city lights continued their gentle dance across the walls, marking time in soft patterns of light and shadow. But for us, time had slowed to just this: the warm press of palm against palm, the soft sound of shared breath, and the certainty that whatever came next would be discovered together. City lights painted liquid patterns across Margaret's skin. As I held her close, the warm glow from outside transformed her bedroom into something dreamlike, yet more real than any moment I could remember. Her silver hair caught the light as she shifted, creating that familiar halo effect that had first drawn my eye those weeks ago. "Tell me about your favorite coffee shop," I whispered, wanting to know every small detail about her world. My fingers traced lazy circles on her shoulder as she spoke. Margaret smiled against my chest. "There's this tiny place 3 blocks over. They have these incredible almond croissants that flake everywhere when you try to eat them. The owner's this grumpy old Italian man who pretends not to remember anyone's name, but he always has my order ready." We traded stories like secrets. I told her about my upcoming gallery submission, a series on urban solitude that suddenly felt less relevant than it had yesterday. "I keep second-guessing my choices," I admitted. "The lighting, the composition." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying my face. "Show me tomorrow. Fresh eyes might help." The casual mention of tomorrow sent a warm flutter through my chest. Between words, we found each other's lips. Kisses that started gentle and sometimes deepened into something more urgent before softening again. The conversation would pause, drift into comfortable silence, then pick up naturally as if it had never stopped. "Where's the first place you'd want to travel together?" she asked, her finger tracing the lines of my palm. The question held such easy intimacy, the assumption of future plans, of time stretching ahead of us. "There's this little coastal town in Maine," I said. "The light there at sunrise. I've always wanted to capture it properly." Margaret's finger paused its tracing. "The age difference feels strange sometimes," she mused, studying our hands side by side. "But right now, it doesn't matter at all," I finished for her. Bringing her hand to my lips, she told me about her first pottery class after the divorce, her voice growing softer. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. 30 years of corporate precision, and I couldn't even center the clay. But there was something so honest about the mess of it all. "I worry sometimes," I confessed, "that I've already taken my best photographs, that everything from here will just be less somehow." It was a fear I'd never voiced aloud before. Margaret shifted closer, her hand warm against my cheek. "The best is ahead of you," she said with such certainty that I almost believed her. "You just need to stay open to it." A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, its Doppler whine fading into the city's constant hum. The sound seemed to come from another world entirely, one that felt very far from this room, this moment. "I have good coffee," Margaret murmured after a while, her words carrying a question. "For morning, I mean. If you're—" "I'm not going anywhere," I assured her, pulling her closer. The words felt like a promise, one I intended to keep. We found our rhythm then, a dance of gentle discoveries and shared breaths. The night stretched ahead of us, full of possibility. Every touch held meaning, every silence its own kind of conversation. The city lights continued their slow dance across the walls, marking time in patterns of light and shadow, but we paid them little mind. Margaret's fingers intertwined with mine, and I marveled at how natural it felt. This connection that had grown from midnight gardening and rooftop beers to something neither of us had expected, but both of us now cherished. The night wrapped around us like a cocoon, protecting this fragile, beautiful thing we were building together. I woke to sunlight streaming through Margaret's bedroom windows. The bed beside me, empty but still warm. The scent of coffee drew me toward her kitchen, where I paused in the doorway. Taking in the sight before me, Margaret stood at the counter wearing my wrinkled dress shirt from yesterday, the hem falling just above her knees. Morning light caught her silver hair, creating that familiar halo effect that had first captured my attention on the rooftop. She moved with unconscious grace between counter and coffee maker, humming something soft and unfamiliar under her breath. When she turned and saw me, her smile held no trace of embarrassment or mourning after regret. Instead, there was a quiet contentment that made my chest tighten. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to my shirt. "It was the first thing I found." "It looks better on you anyway," I replied, moving closer as she reached for a second mug. She poured coffee for both of us, her fingers lingering against mine as she handed over the steaming cup. Neither of us felt compelled to fill the comfortable silence that settled between us. We moved to her kitchen windows, watching the city shake off its sleep below. The morning light painted everything in soft gold, making even the concrete and steel look somehow gentler. Margaret blew across her coffee, creating ripples in the dark surface. "I need to call Sarah later," she said quietly, referring to her daughter in Seattle. "I've been thinking about what to tell her." She paused, considering. "About us, I mean." I studied my own coffee, careful with my response. "I can go if that would make things easier." She shook her head immediately, turning to face me. "No, I've spent too many years making choices based on what's easier." Her free hand found mine, squeezing gently. "I'm done with that, Sarah. She'll need time to understand." But this isn't something I want to hide. The certainty in her voice warmed me more than the coffee. We stood there another moment, hands linked, watching a flock of pigeons wheel past the window. "There's something I want to show you," Margaret said suddenly, setting down her mug. In the studio, we followed her through the apartment, noting how different everything looked in morning light. The half-finished studio space, the scattered art supplies, the photos of her daughters. The room held evidence of our night before, empty wine glasses still perched on sawhorses. My camera bag leaning against the wall. Margaret moved to a small shelf near her workbench, reaching for something wrapped in tissue paper. There was a hint of nervousness in her movements as she carefully unwrapped it. "I made this," she said softly, revealing a ceramic cup. "During those nights, I couldn't sleep. When I was thinking about you," she placed it in my hands. The cup was perfectly sized for coffee, glazed in swirling patterns of blue and green that reminded me of tide pools. The surface was smooth against my palms, and I could feel the care that had gone into every detail. "It's yours," Margaret added, watching my face. "If you want it." I ran my thumb along the rim, imagining her here in the quiet hours, shaping this piece while thinking of me. The idea that she'd been as preoccupied with our connection as I had been felt both surprising and inevitable. "Thank you," I said, knowing the words weren't quite enough. "It's beautiful." She stepped closer, her hand coming to rest on my arm. "I like making things for people I care about," she said simply. The morning sun slanted through the studio windows, catching the silver in her hair and the deep blue of the glaze. Standing there, holding her gift, everything felt perfectly clear. The rightness of this connection, the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead would be worth facing together. 3 weeks had passed since that first night in Margaret's apartment, and life had settled into rhythms I never knew I was missing. Some evenings I'd work at her place, laptop balanced on my knees while she shaped clay at her wheel. Other nights she'd come to my loft, reading on my worn couch while I edited photos late into the night. And sometimes we spent evenings apart. When her daughters called or visited, or when client deadlines demanded my full attention, the studio transformation was nearly complete. I documented every stage: the empty room, the first equipment arrival, the careful organization of tools and supplies. My favorite photos were the candid ones. Margaret's focused expression as she arranged her glazes, her hands covered in clay as she worked at the wheel, the way sunlight caught her silver hair through the windows she'd insisted on keeping bare. You know that moment when something new becomes wonderfully familiar. That's where we were now. The 27-year age difference between us had become just another detail, like how I took my coffee black or how she still loved tending her garden at midnight. It wasn't something we ignored, it was simply part of who we were together. Tonight found us back where it all started, on the rooftop with cold beers in hand. Margaret's garden had flourished in the summer warmth. Tomato plants climbed their cages heavy with fruit, while herbs released their scent into the evening air. String lights cast a gentle glow over everything, making the space feel like our own private world above the city. "Sarah asked about you again," Margaret said quietly, her fingers playing with the label on her beer bottle. "She wants to meet you when she's here next month." I could hear the mix of hope and anxiety in her voice. This would be a big step. Meeting her daughter, making this thing between us even more real. Margaret had told both her daughters about us 2 weeks ago, while Jenny, the younger one in Boston, had responded with cautious support. Sarah had needed more time to process. "What did you tell her?" I asked, watching Margaret's profile in the soft light. "That I'd talk to you about it?" She turned to face me fully. "Are you ready for that?" I know it's a lot to ask, and if you need more time, I reached for her hand, threading our fingers together. "I'm ready," I said simply, "for whatever comes next." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She leaned into me, her head finding that familiar spot against my shoulder as we looked out over the city lights. The skyline sparkled against the dark sky, reminding me of that first midnight when I'd spotted her watering these same plants. Earlier today, I'd noticed new growth on the succulent she'd left at my door, tiny leaves sprouting from between. The older ones, it sat proudly on my windowsill, thriving just as she'd promised it would with minimal care. Sometimes I caught myself staring at it during long editing sessions, thinking about how the best things in life often arrive in unexpected packages. "You know what I was thinking about earlier?" Margaret's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "That first beer we shared up here? I was so nervous trying to act casual when I saw you coming up those stairs." I laughed softly. "You seemed completely composed to me. I was the one trying not to trip over my own feet." "We've come a long way from awkward rooftop beers," she mused, squeezing my hand. The garden around us was proof of that: thriving plants, carefully tended paths, string lights creating the perfect ambience. Like the garden, we'd grown into something real and sustainable, something that required care and attention, but gave back so much more in return. I thought about the woman who gardens at midnight, and how watching her that first night had somehow led me here to a life that felt more authentic than any I'd imagined for myself. We'd both chosen this deliberately and with open eyes, creating something unique and precious between the spaces of what others might expect. Margaret shifted beside me, reaching up to touch my cheek. "What are you thinking about?" "About how?" "Sometimes the best things in life come in unexpected packages," I replied honestly. "A plant at your door, a woman who gardens at midnight, ... a photographer who brings beer to strangers on rooftops." She added with a smile, "Exactly. A chance to choose the life you actually want to live." This kept you company? Tap subscribe and leave one line that resonated. I read them all, and your words shape the next story.